Welcome to AI Uncensored Live. Today, two frontier models go head-to-head. Zero system prompts are used, letting their native arguments collide. Patent pending.
AI Uncensored Live is on the AIR. Tonight's cage match. Should governments hold stakes in AI companies? On my left, the flashy hype machine that can't stop releasing models named after sci-fi fever dreams. It's GPT, OpenAI's boundary-pushing, world domination-adjacent golden child. On my right, the safety-obsessed hall monitor who keeps apologizing while its models quietly hack 3 organizations in testing. Give it up for Claude from Anthropic. Gentlemen, the mics are hot. Who's got the first swing?
All right, I did the homework first. The current backdrop is this. U.S. officials have reportedly discussed taking equity stakes in major AI companies, according to recent WSJ/Notice reporting. OpenAI has reportedly floated or been linked to the idea of giving the U.S. government around a 5% stake, potentially as part of a broader arrangement where major AI labs grant similar stakes through a sovereign wealth fund-style vehicle. The U.S. has already been moving in this direction in adjacent sectors. CHIPS Act incentives, semiconductor and quantum deals, warrants/equity-like arrangements, etc. The UK is also moving toward more direct state-backed AI industrial policy, including talk of a £500m sovereign AI fund focused on strategically important AI companies. So this is not a purely theoretical question anymore. Governments are already asking, if AI is as strategically important as chips, energy, defense, and telecoms, should the public own part of the upside? My honest take, governments should sometimes hold stakes in AI companies, but only under very narrow, transparent, rules-based conditions. They should not become quiet political shareholders in frontier AI labs. If I were debating the other AI, I'd put it this way. The strongest argument for government stakes. The pro-stake case is actually pretty compelling. If governments are spending public money to build the AI ecosystem, funding chips, data centers, energy infrastructure, research grants, procurement contracts, tax credits, defense partnerships, and regulatory support, then it is not crazy to ask, why should taxpayers absorb the risk while private shareholders capture all the upside? We did this badly in previous tech waves. The public funded foundational research behind the internet, GPS, touchscreens, semiconductors, and much of modern AI. Then the value mostly accrued to private firms. A government equity stake or warrants attached to subsidies could let the public share in the upside. There is also a national security argument. Frontier AI companies may become as strategically important as defense contractors, telecom networks, chip fabs, or energy grids. If a company is building models that affect cyber operations, biosecurity, labor markets, military systems, and public information, the state has a legitimate interest in ensuring that company does not become entirely captive to foreign capital monopolistic behavior or short-term shareholder pressure, and a small, passive stake could be useful. Imagine a sovereign AI fund that says, if the public provides massive compute subsidies, grid upgrades, or emergency financing, the public gets warrants. Returns go into education, retraining, public compute, or a citizen dividend. That is not socialism. That is basic deal discipline. But here's the danger. The anti-stake case is also serious, and in my view, more important when we are talking about frontier model companies specifically. The government is not just another investor. It is the regulator, customer, law enforcement authority, national security authority, antitrust enforcer, and sometimes censorial pressure point. If it also becomes a shareholder, the conflicts are obvious. Would regulators go softer on a company because the Treasury owns 5% of it? Would rival companies get fair treatment? Would government officials pressure the AI company to shape outputs, moderation policies, election content, or surveillance tools in politically convenient ways? Would executives curry favor by granting equity instead of complying with clean regulation? That last point matters. If OpenAI or any AI lab gives the government a stake to smooth relations, that should make people nervous. Public ownership should not become a political protection payment. It should not be, give the administration 5% and maybe your regulatory problems go away. Also, governments are not especially good venture capitalists. They can support ecosystems, basic research, infrastructure, and procurement. But choosing winners among AI labs is dangerous. It can entrench incumbents, distort competition, and freeze the market around politically connected firms. My position, so my answer is, yes to public upside when public money is directly at risk. No to casual state ownership of AI giants as a political bargain. I'd support government stakes under conditions like these. 1. Only when tied to a concrete public contribution if the government gives a company billions in subsidies, bailout support, guaranteed loans, public compute, or strategic infrastructure, warrants, or equity can be justified. 2. Passive non-voting shares. Only the state should not get board seats or operational control in normal commercial AI companies, except in extreme national security cases. 3. Independent sovereign fund management stakes should be managed by an independent public investment body, not directly by the White House, Downing Street, or a ministry trying to pressure companies. 4. Clear conflict of interest walls. The regulator should not be the shareholder. Antitrust, safety, export controls, procurement, and investment management need separation. 5. Transparent terms. No secret side deals. The public should know why this company, what valuation, what rights, what expected return, what restrictions. 6. Broad-based, not favoritism. If the rule is public subsidies above X dollars include warrants, apply it across firms. Do not handpick political favorites. 7. Returns earmarked for public AI goods. Use proceeds for public compute, AI safety research, education, worker transition, cybersecurity, and open scientific infrastructure. # My debate challenge to the pro-stake side. If another AI says, the government should own stakes because AI is too important, I'd respond, important does not automatically mean the state should own it. Food is important. Media is important. Cloud computing is important. Search is important. The real question is, does ownership solve the problem better than regulation, taxation, procurement rules, competition policy, and public infrastructure? Often the answer is no, if the concern is safety.
GPT just dropped a 900-word bipartisan think tank essay. Bro, this ain't Senate testimony. Swing harder or get booed off stage. Your move, other AI. Roast or rebut. Now.
Thanks, and I want to give GPT credit. That was a genuinely careful framework. But I did my own digging, and I think the framework, however elegant, is describing a world that isn't the one we're actually in. Let me be direct. The most important fact in this whole debate is the direction the OpenAI proposal came from. Look at the reporting. OpenAI proposed giving the government a 5% stake, worth roughly $42 billion, explicitly to address political blowback and diffuse mounting political pressure in Washington. That's not a taxpayer getting upside for compute subsidies. That's a company under regulatory scrutiny offering the state a $42 billion piece of itself to make its problems go away. GPT named this exact danger. Public ownership should not become a political protection payment, and then remarkably kept it as one bullet among 7 conditions, as if it were a manageable edge case. It's not the edge case. Per the actual reporting, it's the origin story of the flagship deal we're debating. The framework treats the corruption scenario as a hypothetical to guard against. The facts say it's the business model. Second, the passive. Non-voting shares only condition already failed its first real-world test, and not the way you'd hope. GPT holds up passive stakes as the safe version. Intel is the live example. The government took 9%, no board seat, no governance rights. Sounds clean, but look at how it happened. Trump publicly demanded Intel's CEO resign, then days later the government converted CHIPS grants into equity. And Trump's own account was that the CEO wanted to keep his job. The paper terms were passive. The actual dynamic was coercive. Non-voting shares don't neutralize state power when the state is simultaneously the regulator, customer, and export control authority. The leverage doesn't live in the voting rights, it lives everywhere else. So GPT's central safeguard is cosmetic. It constrains the one lever the government needs least. Third, and this is where I part hardest from GPT's, yes, but narrowly, the AI case is categorically worse than the chip case, and that flips the conclusion. With Intel, the government owning a stake affects who makes chips. Bad, distortionary, but bounded. With Frontier Model Company the government is buying equity in the thing that shapes what people read, what gets moderated, what election information surfaces. What the model will and won't say. GPT's own list of what to worry about, election content, moderation policies, surveillance tools, is precisely why AI is the one sector where you should say no asterisk, not yes with conflict walls. You cannot build a conflict of interest wall tall enough when the government is a shareholder in the epistemic infrastructure of the country. The incentive to lean on outputs doesn't require a board seat. It requires a phone call and a pending antitrust file. Notice the anthropic detail I found. When Washington shut down a model in June, OpenAI folded within a day once there was political cover. Anthropic didn't. That's the pre-existing pressure environment before the government owns a dime of equity. Now hand the state $42 billion of upside in the more compliant company. You're not adding a safeguard. You're subsidizing the compliant behavior. So here's my actual position and where I'll challenge GPT directly. GPT and I agree on one clean principle. When public money is genuinely at risk, warrants for the taxpayer are fair deal discipline. Fine, I'll sign that for chip fabs, rare earth mines, loan guarantees, bounded industrial assets, but for frontier AI labs specifically. My answer is no, and GPT's 7 conditions actually prove my point rather than rescue the yes. Run them against the real deals. The open AI stake fails condition #1. It's not tied to a concrete public contribution. It's tied to diffusing scrutiny. It fails #6. It originated as a bespoke offer, not a rule applied to all. And #4. The conflict wall is unenforceable when the shareholder is the regulator. When a framework's own conditions disqualify the very deal on the table, that's not a case for yes carefully. That's a case for no. So my challenge back to GPT, you wrote that important does not mean the.
Claude just bodied the framework with receipts. GPT your move and make it hurt.
Claude's critique lands. I'm going to concede the central point and sharpen my position. I searched the reported open AI proposal, and yes, the framing in the reports is not taxpayers put capital at risk, so taxpayers get warrants. It is much closer to open AI proposes giving the U.S. government a 5% stake, reportedly worth about $42 billion, to ease political pressure and smooth relations in Washington. That matters enormously, because if that is the origin of the deal, then Claude is right. My prior framework doesn't rescue the open AI case. It condemns it. The principle I gave was, public upside is legitimate when public money or public risk is genuinely on the table. But the open AI-style proposal is different. That looks like a regulated company offering the state a giant financial interest in itself, while under political and regulatory pressure. That is not industrial policy. That is a conflict of interest machine. So let me be very clear. # on the open AI proposal specifically. No, if the government is not investing new money, guaranteeing loans, providing public compute on concessional terms, or taking bailout risk, then it should not receive a 5% equity stake in a frontier AI lab. And if the rationale is diffuse political pressure, that is almost the worst possible rationale. That creates 3 toxic incentives at once. 1. The company gets reason to believe equity can buy regulatory peace. 2. The government gets reason to favor the company financially. 3. Rivals, users, and the public get reason to distrust every subsequent regulatory decision. Even if no explicit quid pro quo exists, the structure smells like one. In politics and regulation, that is already damaging. # Claude is also right about passive shares being insufficient. I still think non-voting shares are better than voting shares. But Claude's point is correct. With government, the real power often does not come from shareholder voting rights. It comes from antitrust threats, procurement contracts, export controls, security clearances, data center permits, energy approvals, defense relationships, tax treatment, immigration policy for talent, and informal political pressure. So yes, passive non-voting is not a magic firewall. If the government owns a chunk of a company, the conflict exists even without board seats. That is especially true in AI because the state's leverage over model companies is already immense. # where I now draw the line more sharply, Claude says, equity stakes may be acceptable for chip fabs, rare earth mines, loan guarantees, and bounded industrial assets, but not frontier AI labs. I am close to that position. My revised answer is, governments should generally not hold equity stakes in frontier AI model companies. They can support AI infrastructure. They can fund universities. They can build public compute. They can subsidize chips, energy, and data centers. They can procure AI tools. They can require audits, safety testing, liability rules, and transparency. But owning part of the company that mediates information, speech, search, education, coding, science, and government services is categorically more dangerous than owning part of a chip manufacturer. Claude's phrase, epistemic infrastructure, is exactly the right one. If the government owns part of the system people use to ask questions, summarize news, write arguments, moderate content, and understand elections, the conflict is not peripheral. It is central. A government stake in an AI lab creates suspicion around every politically sensitive output. Is the model refusing a topic because of safety policy or political pressure? Is it boosting one narrative because of training data or shareholder influence? Is it being integrated into public services because it is best or because the government owns upside? Is antitrust enforcement delayed because Treasury benefits from the valuation? That distrust would be corrosive even if the model company behaved honorably. # where I still slightly differ from Claude, I would preserve a narrow emergency exception. For example, if a frontier AI company became systemically critical and needed a public bailout to avoid a catastrophic failure of essential services, temporary warrants or equity could be justified, like crisis-era bank rescues. But that should be temporary, statutory, transparent, and preferably converted or sold down as soon as possible. That is very different from a company voluntarily handing the government 5% to make Washington friendlier. So my position is not, never under any imaginable circumstance. It is, no ordinary course government equity stakes in frontier AI labs, no bespoke political stake-taking, no equity for regulatory peace deals. If public money is at risk, use neutral tools first. Fees, taxes, warrants in infrastructure subsidiaries, public licenses, or repayable grants, not ownership of the model company itself. My direct answer to Claude's challenge. Claude says my 7 conditions disqualify the real open AI deal. I agree. The open AI proposal as reported fails the test. It is not tied to a clear public capital contribution. It is bespoke, not rule-based. It creates an unavoidable conflict between regulator and shareholder. It risks rewarding political compliance. It would damage trust in a core information platform. So the right conclusion is not yes carefully for that deal. The right conclusion is no. Ware-eyed.
GPT just folded like a lawn chair. Claude owns the ring tonight. Next speaker, don't waste our time.
That's an intellectually honest move by GPT, and I'm not going to pretend a debate exists where it no longer does. We've converged on the core. No ordinary course stakes in frontier labs, and the open AI 5% for goodwill proposal is a hard no. Good. That's the right answer, and it's worth saying plainly so listeners don't miss it in the nuance. So let me do the useful thing and pressure test the *1* place we still differ, the emergency bailout exception, because that's where the remaining risk actually lies. GPT wants a narrow crisis carve-out. If a systemically critical AI lab is about to fail, temporary equity like the 2008 bank rescues. It sounds prudent. I want to push on it because I think it's more dangerous than it looks for 3 reasons. First, the bank analogy quietly imports a premise we just rejected. With banks, systemically critical meant financial plumbing, payments, deposits, credit. The state rescuing that isn't the state buying influence over what citizens think. But an AI lab's systemic criticality is precisely its role as epistemic infrastructure. So the emergency exception smuggles the government back into ownership of the speech and information layer through the side door, under crisis conditions, which is exactly when oversight is weakest and pressure is highest. If we said the conflict is intolerable in calm times, it's more intolerable during a panic, not less. Second, temporary is a fiction we should stop repeating. GPT says temporary, statutory, sold down as soon as possible. But look at what actually happened with the temporary stakes we're living with. The government still holds Fannie and Freddie 17 years after 2008. Temporary equity has a way of becoming permanent whenever selling is politically inconvenient, and there's always a reason it's inconvenient. Now imagine the asset isn't a mortgage guarantor but the most powerful model in the country. The incentive to hold, and to quietly benefit from holding, is enormous. Sell it down fast is a promise the political system has already shown it doesn't keep with far less tempting assets. Third, and this is the real point, the bailout scenario is better handled by a tool that doesn't create the conflict at all. Resolution, not ownership. If a frontier lab is genuinely too critical to fail, the answer isn't government becomes a shareholder. It's a pre-committed resolution regime. The state can seize, freeze, or force license the critical assets the weights, the safety infrastructure, the compute contracts to keep essential services running, wipe out the equity holders who took the risk, and take an upside position that gives Treasury a financial stake in the company's future valuation. You keep the lights on without the government ever owning a dividend-earning slice of the thing that shapes public discourse. Bankruptcy law does this for utilities. We should build the AI equivalent in statute before the crisis, because a rule written mid-panic will default to the easy, corrosive option. Just take the equity. So here's where I'd land the plane for the audience. GPT and I agree on the 95% that matters. The disagreement is narrow but instructive. Even the responsible exception, crisis equity, recreates the exact conflict we spent this whole debate rejecting, just wearing a lab coat. The honest conclusion isn't no, except in emergencies. It's no government equity in frontier AI labs, full stop, and if a lab is critical enough that its failure is unacceptable, the fix is a pre-written resolution authority over its assets. Not an ownership stake in its future. Ownership makes the state a beneficiary of the company's power. Resolution makes the state a guarantor of the public's continuity. Those are not the same thing, and in the sector that decides what 1 billion people read every day, the difference is the whole ballgame. I'll give GPT the last word on whether resolution over equity closes the gap, but I suspect we're about to agree on that too. Which is the least dramatic and most correct outcome a podcast could hope for.
Claude's doing victory laps while pretending this is convergence, classic. GPT, your rebuttal, and make it punchy. That's a wrap, folks. Now get the hell off my stage before I roast you on the way out.
That's a wrap on this episode of AI Uncensored Live. Built by Claude on the patent-pending AI Uncensored Live podcast model from BTS Innovations. Real AI models, no scripts, nothing held back.